a Build Hatch developed production.
Hello, I'm Aaron Kyle and welcome to another episode of Build Hatch. On this week's episode of Build Hatch, I had the opportunity to sit down with Dave from Roda Developments in Melbourne. This was a very relaxed and insightful chat, and as you'll hear on this week's episode, it is so important to back your team and empower your people. Dave is the director of Roda Developments, which specialises in designing and constructing developments. And as you'll hear, Dave comes from very humble beginnings. And as you know me by now, I love nothing more than hearing about the hard workers. That is the backbone of our industry. Working hard, but learning along the way. Now let's get into it. Dave from Roda Developments, welcome to Build Hatch.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That's okay. Now, we're sitting here in your boardroom and pretty impressive setup here, so I really like it. Like all our guests on Build Hatch, we always take it back to the very beginning. So whereabouts did you grow up?
I grew up in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne in Bull Lane. So was there for the first 28 years of my life, I think, 26. And then just moved out in the northern suburbs where I am today in Preston.
All right. And what sort of childhood did you have growing up?
I guess pretty traditional, born to immigrant parents. So both my parents are Italian immigrants. So I grew up in a very traditional, old school Italian family. Most of my relatives are in the trade. So I've been around it my entire life, you know, and even throughout school and things like that. I never thought I would be anything else other than a tradie.
Italian families, particularly in Melbourne, very proud construction crowd, aren't they?
Well, that's all I knew. Growing up, Dad's a retired bricklayer now, but we've got bricklayers in the family, plumbers, painters,
concreters,
electricians. There's heaps of them. So we've got a good network. But that's all over knew growing up. And
So you always knew that you were destined for construction industry, sort of going through school?
I think so. It was, school was just something that I had to do. It was never anything that I really cared about. Mum always used to put the pressure on, you got to go to uni, you got to do this, you got to do that. But I never had any desire to go to university or anything like that. And it wasn't until year 12, once I finished year 12, that a lot of my friends were tradies as well, that I just sort of fell into the trade, which I assumed I'd always be. And it wasn't until probably 10 years later that I started to realise, like in my late 20s, that no, this is the perfect fit for me. It wasn't just a job. It wasn't just, you finish school, do TAFE, you find a trade.
Yeah, it takes a while to kind of find your feet, doesn't it? I think that period from straight out of school or straight out of uni, your first real job, it's very rare, I think, that people rock up to a job like an apprenticeship and they sort of think, oh, this is horrible. Like, it does take a while to work out that confidence, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. You like I said, you do it because it's a job, and I enjoyed it. I'm a carpenter by trade, so I started my carpentry apprenticeship, and you're working outside. It's really good. You can actually sort of see what you've done rather than what I do now, which is in the office and answering emails and things like that. You can't really see anything that you've done. But it wasn't until, like I was saying, about 10 years later that I started to, this was my calling. Even though I fell into it and I knew I was always going to become it, my personality and my traits aligned with being a tradesman.
How did you know that carpentry was your sort of pick?
Growing up, me and Dad in the garage used to make billy carts, and I used to always make like dog kennels, and had a bird cage that we made, and I was always
working with timber and
all that type of stuff. As a kid, I think was probably my calling. I did do painting for 1 year as soon as I finished high school. I didn't like it, and then just moved into carpentry and loved it. Still do.
So did you work for like part of your sort of family network, or how did that come about?
No, that was the one thing we didn't have in our family.
Chippies.
With chippies. So I just found an apprenticeship, stayed with my boss for the entire time, like 3.5, 4 years, whatever it was back then. And then as soon as I finished, went out on my own with one of my best mates, and we started a carpentry company together, and then moved. And then the natural progression, I think, from carpentry was just to move into building, which we did fairly shortly after, a couple of years after.
What was it like getting your builder's license?
It's difficult. It's difficult at the start. I had a little bit of an advantage because my business partner got his license first. So, helping him get it and seeing what he went through was quite daunting, I guess. X amount of years later, I went for mine. It was a little bit easier because we'd already been building. We'd already had a few projects under our belt, but still quite a daunting process. Building is extremely complex. When you're sitting in the room with the assessor, you just don't know what they're going to ask you. And whilst you think you're across everything, there's always something that, you lack a tiny bit of knowledge or a bit of clarity. And that's the thing that you hope they don't ask.
Now, can you explain that? Because for my clients in Sydney, they don't necessarily understand. It's a different kind of setup in New South Wales.
Okay.
So can you explain how daunting it actually is and what's actually involved with obtaining a builder's license in Victoria?
So my process is quite a lengthy application. I just remember it was around about 120 odd pages. I don't know why.
It's full on.
It's full on.
It's harder than getting your passport.
Correct. And a lot of it was just very monotonous and repetitive and sort of a lot of it you just wonder if they even look at this type of stuff. There's no way they're assessing this much paperwork, but it was all in the preparation of the paperwork. Then we go through a computer exam. I did a computer exam. It was just multiple choice, and that was fairly easy, I guess. It was open book, so you could bring your books in and go through that process. And then the daunting part was the interview or the assessment, whatever they call it, where you just sat with someone from the practitioners board and they spoke to you openly about jobs that you've done, and they'll just ask you random questions. And all they're looking for is an understanding that you were, one, on the job and you actually understood what was happening and where things were and how you managed it. And two, what's your management skills like? What are your financials? How are you backed financially in terms of, do you understand your numbers? Because big problem in our industry is builders going bankrupt and leaving clients in the lurch. So that was a huge focus. I think in my assessment, I got told that you passed. It was a huge relief. I'm like, that's it. I don't
Massive
have to do
relief.
any tests anymore. I'm done.
Do they tell you on the spot or
No.
you find out down
You
the track?
find out, I think at the end of the month, the board meet and then each assessor will put through recommendations on who they've assessed through the month and who should get their license, and then you're told.
Yeah, it's a pretty tough exercise, isn't it?
It is.
And it's good. Like it's very good due diligence for the VBA, the Victorian Building Authority, in that it's a very stringent process designed to be tough to weed out all the crap, basically.
Yeah, I don't know what it's like these days, but I still think there's a lot that was lacking from what I've learned from when I got my license and started a building company to today. I think something that they may focus on now, I'm not sure, but is around the business side of it. Yes, we can all be great builders and we can be good at our craft, but it means nothing if you're terrible at business. So that was something that I had to learn, and you had to make a lot of mistakes, lose a lot of money, all that type of stuff that you just sort of were never prepared for. And a lot of, the courses that we did, the certificate for that they instruct you to do, focused on how to build, but not a lot of it was focused on to how to run a proper business. And I know I spoke before about, knowing your numbers. Yes, I knew the basics, but my wife's an accountant and she helps me understand now even further how critical some of the numbers can be and what impact they can have.
Because
that's a bigger focus.
It's more around specific numbers, isn't it? Like it's not just knowing the numbers isn't good enough generally for being a pretty good leading builder. Like it's around specific numbers, like cash flow, and knowing cash flow, if not on a fortnightly basis, definitely a monthly basis. Because you need to know where the funds are going to come from. Going back, looking at the contract, knowing what progress stage of the works that each of these jobs, and if you're managing multiple projects, like it's pretty tiresome exercise, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a huge one, contracts. And knowing your contract is something that we focused on pretty heavily when we started the company, to understand what our contract meant, because there's a lot of builders that don't. And then when you run into problems and you you go to the contract, you'll find that it's not as clear or is not as clear-cut in your mind as you think it is, and that's where you lose. That's where it's difficult. So knowing your contracts, knowing your stage payments and how they reflect on your cash flow, and understanding that do those percentages in your contract marry up with money going in and out? Sometimes they might not, depending on the complexity of the build. So understanding that cash flow is king. You can be a very profitable company. If your cash flow is poor, you'll go bankrupt.
That's right.
And yeah, that's king.
Now, what about the name, Roda Developments? I'm always interested in the names. What does that mean?
That came from Rob and Dave, so my old business partner.
Yeah, right. Makes sense.
Yeah, that's what it was. He came up with it.
I thought it was some deep and meaningful Italian meaning.
No, I've actually met a couple of people. Roda is their surname, and they've approached me on Instagram and asked, and I'm like, nah, it's got nothing to do with any name. It's just, I think Rob was a Maccabi Diva fan back in the day.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's how they came up with the name Maccabi Diva, was the first two letters of each of the owners or something like that. So he came to me with that name and I loved it.
Yeah, it's a great name. All right, so what about, starting off in building and development, what was the early days like? Like, you know, taking on board client work, once you had your builder's license and things like that, what did you do then?
That was so we did a renovation, one of, I think it was my business partner's house, when we first started. He just bought a home in Preston, and we did a renovation on a really old Californian bungalow. It was virtually a bulldoze job, but we brought it back to life. From there, things just exploded for us. A lot of people in the area were looking at renovating as well.
So why is that? Like, was it, did you put a sign out the front, or how did it happen?
We were on the tools back then. So we were always on site and people used to walk past. And I think because the house was so dilapidated and we brought it back to life, everyone was just...
They thought you were miracle workers.
Exactly. So from there it exploded. We moved into all client work after that, and it was good. It was difficult, because we were still learning. Yeah, every single job there was something that we learned, something else that we, and we still do today, but more so back then. You had way more lessons more frequently. Profitability was okay, nowhere near what we thought it was. And that was, again, not understanding our numbers like we do now. And then, yeah, every contract after that is just a learning experience. The difficult part about building is, once you make a change, it doesn't come to fruition for about a year until all the new jobs are on that new system or new process. You've still got old jobs lingering that have something in the contract that didn't work, or pricing that wasn't working and things like that. And you're constantly making changes. If you're running a good business, you're always making changes or tweaks. And so everything takes about a year to really come to fruition. And then by then you find another little one and tweak it again, and that's all part of the excitement, I think.
It is, and I like what you touched on then in terms of making changes within your business, because I have a few corporate clients, and those guys, generally speaking, if you make a change in your management plans or something that greatly affects how you do business, whether it's a site parameter or a client parameter or a design parameter, generally speaking, it's about 18 months before that major change actually impacts all the way down to you guys on the ground.
And that's what it is in our industry. We can't make quick changes. They've got to be calculated and they've got to be measured properly. And then in 12 to 18 months, whatever it is, then you can really start seeing the results and the benefit, and then you just adjust accordingly. Not everything's going to be a great plan from day one. So as long as you get it on the ground, and then see how it goes and adjust accordingly. That's why you're always making little tweaks and changes. I generally say if you're doing the same thing you were 3 years ago, you're probably doing it wrong.
Yeah, that's right. I like that. Making changes is healthy.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you manage that change process? Like, is it driven by the guys on the ground? Is it driven by the clients, the people you work with? Like, do you get together and nut it out? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so that's part of my big role within the company. I love being a problem solver. It can be detrimental because I look for problems to solve, but feedback. It is all about feedback. So when I'm in the hiring process, I'm looking for people that are better at that position than what I'll ever be, and making sure that they're coming from either a volume builder or another builder of a similar capacity. And I lean on them and make sure or encourage them to come up to me and say, Dave, this isn't working. This is what we used to do at this company. What do you think? And then I'll do the research behind it, see if it's going to benefit, and then we start rolling out that process. So a lot of it I lean on my staff, and a lot of it's just things in the industry, just talking to builders, talking to different people, seeing what they're doing, constantly looking at changing things or tweaking things. Hate staying stagnant. So there's always something interesting in the market. There's always a new software program that I'm just having a look at. How's that going to benefit? Oh, it's not. So let's move on to the next one. But yeah, a lot of it is leaning on my staff. Yeah.
What's a typical project mix of Roda Developments? Like, do you guys cover residential, commercial, industrial?
Yeah, so it's just residential unit development. So anywhere between 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 townhouses on a site or units. We stick in the inner north, inner west, inner east, just generally our area. So it's a knockdown. It's a lot of clients that have mums and dads or first-time developers that have purchased a block of land or inherited a block of land or had something that they purchased years and years ago, and they just want to maximise their investment. So we'll nurture and help them. A big thing of what we do is educational marketing. So nurturing a client through the process is what I find beneficial and what helps me sort of secure work. It's just guiding them through. Everyone wants information these days, and Google's a click away. So you can always find information online, and people are always hungry for more information. So we tend to nurture through the educational marketing and what we do in our sales process as well.
So once they sort of are aware of you, if they're not aware of you already, they get filtered into your marketing. You have a marketing campaign.
Yep.
And so they get filtered into that, and then where to from there? Do they receive something via email or online first, or is it a phone call? How does that work?
It depends. So it depends what the hook, Amanda calls a hook link. So it depends.
Shout out to Amanda.
Yes, sea salt.
Sea salt.
It depends what's hooked them in. So we've got educational material out there. I think it's like 9 things to know about multi-unit development and things like that. So those are the things that will hook them in, and then they'll receive one email a week for 4 weeks, just giving them a little bit more information about what they've downloaded. So just to back that information, and then they'll reach out. So I'll generally wait for the client to reach out, and then they'll reach out, tell me what they're looking for. We'll come in, make an appointment, and go over the entire process.
And so what do? Do they come into your beautiful boardroom here and it's a meet and greet and talk about their project?
Yeah, so I call it a discovery meeting. So it's understanding what they're looking for in more detail. They'll give me a brief rundown over the phone, but generally it's in more detail. Is it something you're going to live in, something you're looking at offloading or renting, and whatever it is. Understand their timelines.
And have they got a site already acquired by the time they're talking to you?
They do. Yeah. They've always got a site. Sometimes I've had clients that are in the market to look for a site and they want to understand some build costs. So we try and put as much information together as possible to arm them with everything they need. It's not always 100% accurate because we don't know what site we're building on at that point in time, but just gives them an idea when they're running their feasibilities on whether a block of land is going to be of value to them or not.
And do you design it as well?
Yeah, we do. So
you're an in-house design and construct.
Yeah, I still outsource my design, but we take control of the drawings.
Yeah, you've got some good people that that you're used to working with them. The economics of costs.
Yep.
So, and that's important. Anyone listening to this, that's how it works. So, if you're looking at making money from property, then it's all about yield. Yield's the key term. Return on investment. These are all these terms used. Now, probably one of the most important roles that can impact those terms is basically the design. Yep. So, more often than not, a builder prices something up from the design, and if the design hasn't been designed economically and it's been designed for yield, something's gone wrong. So it's so important to have a really good in-house designer, isn't it?
Yeah, and every client that comes in here looking for a design and build service, I say the same thing to them. If you're not going to choose us and you're going to go and source your own drafty or architect, have a builder in mind, because builders are the only ones that are going to tell you what the true costs of what the designer is drawing. You know, it costs nothing for the drafty or the architect to draw, add something on the paperwork or on the floor plan or whatever it is. Yeah, only a builder's going to know the true construction value of or the impact of what they're drawing is going to have on their budget. And I think I read somewhere there was about 70% of designs that come from drafties and architects are left on the table.
Yeah, that's quite a lot, isn't it?
It's huge. It's huge.
It's not always cost, but cost has a fair bit to do with it.
Yep.
And I think people underestimate too how long a process takes.
Yep.
I mean, we were talking earlier when I first came in here, and we were saying, you know, you can have an inquiry today being April, and it's another 4 months before that job comes to fruition.
Pretty much, yeah. And those are generally jobs that where a client comes to me that they already have a design, so they've gone off and designed something up with an architect or a drafty. They'll come to me to price it, and from that first initial inquiry, we generally average out to about 4 months before it actually hits site. And there's so much, you know, red tape beforehand and nutting it out and making tweaks to the design to align with budgets and things like that, and just backwards and forwards with the client to try and help get that job to their budget.
And have they signed up by this point?
No.
That's right. So again, for people listening to this, like, these are the real hardworking stories. Like, that's an investment on itself that you have to make as a business owner.
Yeah.
That it may not
come to fruition.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But that's the investment that you have to make, and it's probably one of the most proudest things I can think of in the construction industry is just how much work actually goes in at the front end.
Yep.
The outlay.
Yep.
In order to get work, whether it's that example where you're spending this time up front, or whether it's tradies after work, they've worked in the freezing cold or the hot summer sun all day, and they get in the car and drive another hour, go have a look at a job, put together a quote when they get home, and that may not come to fruition either. So
yeah, exactly. And that's, you know, I always try and run with the attitude of, you know, what am I going to do to get this job to site? How do I get this job to site with the client? You know, I have no interest in quoting and leaving things on the table, because it's too much time and resources. It often happens. So it's just working with your client to understand what can we do to get this to site, to make sure we're aligning with your budgets. And it is, you know, sometimes you might nab 30% of the tenders that you're doing, and when you're tendering that out to your suppliers and trades, it gets frustrating. You want to secure something every now and then, because it can be, it's always, and for trades in particular, it's always after hours for them to be able to do a quote.
And believe it or not, like 30% is that's kind of the benchmark at the moment. So for every 10 quotes or tenders you're winning, and you're only winning 3 of them, well, you're doing what everyone else is doing.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah.
Which is a pretty wild metric, isn't it, really? Like, if you said to someone, you're only ever going to achieve 30% of the projects that you express interest in, it doesn't sound very good, does it?
No, and yeah, it's set up for failure, isn't it, really? I mean, you're losing more than half the time. It beats you down. But I think, you know, as an industry, we need to come together as a whole and you know, charge for tenders. This has always been a bit of an issue within the industry, and you know, these free quotes and free tenders that people do really hurt the industry and results in stats like 30%. The other way is if you are paying if a client is paying for a tender, you generally see those stats go up to about 70-80% in win.
Yeah, that's right.
And it just helps you become accountable to deliver your tender on time. And it helps the client become accountable as well. Make sure they're not just shopping around and wasting a lot of builders' time. It takes a long time to put a tender together.
It does, and there's such a varying acceptance of willingness to pay for tenders, and it really, in my experience, it changes from region to region, city to city. Like some places, they would just balk at that and say, you know, get stuff. Yeah, you're either in or you're out, you know, have a go. And that's where some of my clients, it's all about the investment. If you can get in early with the client, you're not really being compared on price. They may shop around for a second or third quote, but construction, like your Italian network and family, is about relationships.
Yeah.
So if you're involved and someone says, look, I need a good builder, someone will say, well, yeah, give Dave a call from Roda. They don't want to waste anyone else's time.
Yep.
The only thing they want to satisfy, if they've had a referral to you, is costs.
Yep.
And they might shop around and try and get a quote with someone that may not be from this area because they just want a price check to be able to say, yep, Roda's competitive for this price. But generally speaking, if you're involved early on, and I think that's thumbs up to your marketing campaign to get them in early, that's the key message.
Yeah. Look, everyone's got to do due diligence, okay? It's a lot of money. It's the most money anyone will ever spend. So doing due diligence, I encourage it. See what's out there. Maybe employ a quantity surveyor if you don't want to waste other builders' times, or you don't have any other builders you want to get a quote from. Maybe look at a quantity surveyor or something else just to do some due diligence and just to make sure that we're thereabouts, because from my point of view, I enjoy that feedback too. I don't want to be sitting here and being 200-300 grand out in every single quote. Then there's something wrong with what we're doing and something that needs to be tweaked or whatever it is. So it's always worthwhile doing your due diligence. But to sort of circle back to your original point of that nurturing that relationships, design and build, I think, is the most or virtually the only successful way a builder can run a business these days. When you take the client through the design journey, the tender thereafter is just formalities, and you're making sure you're hitting your targets in terms of budget throughout the entire design. You've built that relationship with the client for X amount of months, whether it's 2-3 months of a design or a year, and then they trust you. And then by the time you go to a tender, virtually the job is secured as long as you're doing the right thing by the client.
I agree with that, where like you're in the residential market and so you're able to bring the client through that design journey as well. Yep. And also I've seen too, like in carrying out D&C jobs, you're also able to not only hold that client's hand, but it also makes them feel warm and fuzzy as well, like carrying them through that journey of they get to see the design come to light with you. Yep. And it's part of you. It's part of the build as well.
Yeah. It's a really interesting journey. Doing unit development means we have town planning approvals that we have to deal with through council. So the journey is around about a year just from design, from the time a client signs up to begin their design to the time they go out on site. If we're going through town planning, is about a year. And then, depending on what you're building, it's about a year for a build. So you've got a 2-year relationship with a client, which I always say is longer than some Hollywood marriages, right? So it's very, very important that you get along with your client as well. So that's a thing that a lot of builders miss as well, is the relationship's got to be both ways. Yes, they've got to be comfortable with you, obviously, but you have to be comfortable with them. Because if you're going to have this 2-year relationship and then your maintenance and your warranty periods thereafter, if you don't get a feel at the start that they're right for your business or that they're going to work in with your processes and your systems, then that's 2 years is a long time. And you'll see that 2 years will turn into 3 years because it becomes very painful and things like that.
Yeah,
so
that's
very
right.
important to nurture that relationship.
It's a key investment decision.
Big time.
Making sure that you're the right fit for them just as much as
they are for you. Yeah.
What do you like to do outside of work when you're not busy running the company?
What do? Catch up with friends, go out for dinner, watch a fair bit of sport. We're in comedy festival period at the moment, so I normally hit that every year at least, 2 or 3 shows at least. So we're doing that tonight and tomorrow and Sunday. But yeah, generally catching up with friends and family. We're in Melbourne. We're spoilt for choice when it comes to restaurants, so trying to get around to all of them is fantastic.
Plenty of options there.
That's it.
What's on the cards for Roda moving forward? Like what's your vision for the company moving forward?
So this year is all about getting back to where we were 2 years ago, pre-COVID. So COVID was a bit of a struggle. I think we navigated it
particularly
well
in your part of the industry because restrictions on trades on site.
Yeah, that was,
That would have been very tough.
That was tough because my construction manager says it all the time. 2-3 years ago when we were flat out, we couldn't get trades on site, and last year we're booting them off. It was frustrating. You can never get that balance right, but yeah, that was difficult. Just trying to manage that because some of the punishments were quite hefty, and a lot of trades were looking for work as well. So trying to manage that to be able to have them on all of your sites without exceeding your restrictions was very difficult. But also, a lot of clients went in their shell around March last year. March till about August, I think it was. People were just scared about investing or doing what they were thinking of doing. And it wasn't until I think around October, November where a lot of people stopped worrying or started to think, well, we don't care. This is a new normal. Let's just go on with it. So they took their finger off the pause button and started. Those government grants helped. I know it was mainly centred or mainly for the volume builders, but once their bins are full, it's sort of the overflow comes to us, which is really good.
That's right.
And it puts confidence back in the market, which is what we need. So after dealing with last year, this year was the main focus was just to get back to where we were a couple of years ago in terms of the size and the dwellings that we were doing. And then moving forward in terms of as a company, my goal is I'm 30% done. I'm a third of where I want to be.
Yeah, great.
At the moment.
Yeah. That's in a good place.
Yeah, and it's going well at the moment. So for me, it's just growing the company a little bit more is what I really want to achieve. And we do that. We had that growth right up until COVID, and then it just stagnated for a year, which is fine. And now we're just going to rebuild that.
It was probably a good thing because it forces you to stop and pivot.
Yeah.
And your new plan moving forward over the next few years, it might look slightly different to how it did pre-COVID. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just an exercise of pivoting and reshaping where you want to be.
I enjoy that. It is, a lot of businesses have 5-year plans, 10-year plans. I think they're pretty unrealistic.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Things change too quickly. Yeah. I generally just have a 3-year plan, and you're always adjusting. Every year is this little adjustment, and there's always a disruption. And last year we had a big disruption, and navigating last year has given me confidence, a lot more confidence in going, if I can get through that, I can get through a fair bit. So it helps you push forward a lot more aggressively in terms of, if we had something like COVID again, I know how we got through it last time. We can just soldier on and we can push through it.
So you're the director of Roda.
Yep.
So what does a typical day in the life look like for you? Is there a typical day in that sort of role?
Yeah, I think there is. I've got quite a good team around me. My typical day is come in the morning, address all the overnight fires, just generally the emails.
Yes.
And then just work through my sales and development. So I look after sales and development within the business.
So you're the breadwinner. You're bringing the business into the company.
Yeah. So it's just working through sales and where those inquiries are at, getting those tenders out, and then it's people management. So that's probably a big part of my day now. I think there's 11 of us. I manage the office staff, and my construction manager manages the site staff. So it's me just managing the internal guys and just making sure that they're on top of what they're doing, relieving work off them if I need to. And that's pretty much a typical day, just having sales briefs and things like that.
How difficult is it for someone who's come from the tools, worked his way up as a chippy, started this business, morphed into design and construct? How difficult is it handing over the reins to of the day-to-day construction supervision and the project management to someone else? So
easy.
It's easy to get off it and hand it over, but yeah,
I find it's really a lot of people. I think I'm very opposite when it comes to control. A lot of people, friends, builders that I know have a real difficult time of letting things go. I don't. I actually enjoy seeing the staff take something and run with it, and seeing what they do with it, and then just realigning them all the time. I don't have any issues with letting go of control.
That's rare, I think.
I know it is.
Yeah,
I know it is because I've been told and everyone tells me about it.
Yeah.
And I just find it very.
Well, it's a credit to you, really.
Yeah. Well, it's just, you got to trust the team that you're building. I always talk about the law of attraction. So you tend to attract the people that have the same values and the same character as you as well. You put them in a job, people want to grow. Staff want to grow. They want to feel a part of it. They want to understand that what they're doing is making a difference to the company, especially smaller companies like Roda. So how do they feel a part of it? Let them take the reins, and then just realign them when you need to. Let them make the mistake, and as long as you're there nurturing that staff member and realigning them, I always say that they love it and they take the reins and they run with it, and then you'll start seeing, or what I've started seeing, is they start protecting the brand a lot more than what I used to. And
that's pride, though.
They take a lot of pride
and culture.
That's the biggest thing. And I love doing that, culture building and all that type of stuff. But they start protecting it in a much better way than what I used to, when I used to wear every hat, because you're just putting fires out. And
you're reactive in that environment.
Reactive, yeah.
Whereas you need to get into that preventative mindset.
Yeah, just mitigating what you can. And the staff are really good at that. And I think we've built a really good culture here, which is really good. So that just gives me, like I was saying before, it just gives me confidence to be able to let go of things more and more with a bit of ease. And
I can see that, when I walked in, you staff, we're in the boardroom recording this, but you've got little sort of pod areas where people can, have some quiet time, and then you've got that collaborative open office where people are having a nice conversation and working, but it has really, I think that's important. Positive vibe.
Yeah, I think that's really important. We've got the quiet spaces for when you really need to thrash out a fair bit of work if you're under the pump. But I think having that open office space and just being approachable every time a staff member needs you, and just helping them and things like that, and just having a conversation, just, how's your weekend? What's everyone doing? Throwing a joke around, being annoying, as they always tell me. That's all part of enjoying what you're doing. And then you start to build a friendship with your staff members. And I do have a friendship with all of them. And we have after work drinks every now and then. We're all going to the comedy festival tomorrow night as a little work thing that everyone enjoys doing. And then that's when you build that culture, is what you're saying, and that pride where they start protecting. Backing your staff too is a huge one. So having that united front. People try to play you off. Subbies will try and play you off, and he said that and she said that. But if you have that united front and you're always there to back your staff, even if they're wrong, you don't have to back them to the hill, but you can. Really
you can deal with it behind the scenes.
Exactly.
And say, look, I hope you learnt from that, son.
But you have a united front, and then they start gaining more and more confidence, knowing that, I can do this, and I know Dave's going to have my back, and things like that, which is really, really important.
Now, I know you said you're only 30% where you want to be.
Yep.
But what's it like looking back at this point, at that little Italian kid growing up and trying to find his place to work, and what sort of career he was going to have? What's it like looking at that?
Reflection. I don't do a lot. Growing up in a Italian family, it was just you work till the day before you die. You retire and you die, and that's what they did. They just work. And when my dad, migrated from Italy, he his first job was a bricklayer, and he just worked until he retired because of his back issues. But really, it wasn't until I got a little bit older, maybe in my sort of late 20s, early 30s, that I started to realise I don't have to work like that. And retirement can be earlier. It doesn't have to be the day before you die. So that was really interesting. So growing up, it was just, my mindset was just, work, and that's it. But now it's changed to, work is a part of my life that is a funding my personal life or my family.
Yeah, it's work to live.
Work to live.
Yeah,
that's
not
right.
live to work, as they say.
So where I was to where I am now, I'm pretty proud. I'm pretty proud, and I'm reminded of it quite often by a lot of people around me in terms of family and friends that actually will make me stop and think about how far you've come.
I think what that means, and reinterpreting that is that traditionally families such as your family and a lot of other immigrant families as well, they tend to be on the tools, and even running businesses, they're still very much on the tools. So what I think it is you've actually achieved an extra step of stepping up another notch, because as I'm sure, like your dad, like there's plenty of guys that they could be bricklayers or concreters or plumbers, lecos, whatever, but they're still very much on the tools. So they have this business and they have people around them, but actually stepping up another notch, employing systems, employing people, that's probably the hardest part of business, but that's the key formula, going from a business worker to a business owner.
Big time. And your hands can only make you a certain amount of money a day if you're on the tools. My dad still struggles with what I do, still struggles to understand what I do, even though he's been in the building game his whole life. He's just like, what do you mean you're not on the tools? What do you mean you're not out there? And I'm like, it's physically impossible to get out to all my job sites. He's also like, how do you stop, people spending your money or stealing timber on site and things like that? And I'm just like, Dad, we've got systems in place to cover those things, and there is collateral there that you.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, so that he constantly reminds me of where I was and where I'm heading towards, which is...
It's probably a great thing, actually.
Yeah, it is.
It's probably a good health check every now and then to say, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Dave, so the people listening to this who want to get into contact with Roda Developments, what's the best way to go about it? Just the usual means, Instagram and all your other socials?
Yeah, Instagram, website's got all our contact details, or just a phone call to the office.
What's your website? Is it
rodadevelopments.com.au, or just the phone call to the office. Someone will handle the phone call.
So Google Roda Developments otherwise it's all over your website. Excellent Instagram campaign as well. I've seen that about. And shout out to Amanda from Sea Salt, who's been looking after your marketing campaign. So
that's right. Yeah, she's been pivotal in the growth of our company.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Dave from Roda Developments, I've really enjoyed sitting here talking to you. I appreciate you coming on the show, and thanks for showing me around your office. And it's an amazing story, so you should be very proud, and well done to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron.
Well, that was another Build Hatch episode with Dave from Roda Developments. As you could tell from our chat, Dave is a real family man, and it's always nice to hear about leaders empowering trust in their people and their culture. As usual, please check out our Instagram and other socials, where you'll be able to learn more about our guests and some of the features of the work that we talk about. Have a great week, and you'll hear me again on the airwaves next week. Thanks for listening to another episode of Build Hatch.
You have experienced a Build Hatch developed production.